fire makes change. What does fire require to make change? Who can tell me? Anyone? Anyone? Students in the room? Boy Scouts of fire? Anyone? Yeah? Fuel, heat, and oxygen. Correct. So when we have those things together, we get change. These combinations of things come together to make change. But what requires the change that people make? What changes our behavior? I don't have to answer this out loud, but think about in yourself. You have had circumstances in your life that have led you to create change. And this behavior change is created by a variety of things, but we can say that from a variety of research that we can recognize that motivation, opportunity, and capability are often what lead to this behavior change. Now, if we knew this, if knowing this was enough to make all of us do everything that we thought we might want to do, then don't you think that we'd all just have all our lives figured out? No. So knowing this is not enough. Knowing that we need motivation, knowing that we need opportunity, knowing that we need capability is not enough. In fire, it's more than just fuel, heat, and oxygen that comes together to create a change. That change is a perpetual thing. It's looping around. We've got fire potential, fire behavior, fire effects. Those things all blend together. They're not a beginning and an end. It's a continuum. And our behavior change of ourselves is the same, where we loop around. All these things contribute. And so this is not just a one and done. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is not some big reveal about what's going to get all of us to change our behavior to make the things happen in our lives we need to have happen. Or in this case, I'm going to be talking about prescribed fire. But what I'm going to talk to you about today are the nuance of how we can approach certain populations of people and that we can facilitate a behavior change around prescribed fire and smoke management. The title of my dissertation is Advancing Prescribed Fire Through Effective Knowledge Transfer. My adjunct professor is Laura Holyoke. Thank you very much for all the help you've given. Sarah McCaffrey, Lita Kobziar, Stephen Daly Larson, and Travis Pavelio. And a good portion of my study was funded by the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. So thank you to them for their support. When you are hearing any information from anybody, you've got to recognize that they come with a background. They come with opinions, they come with beliefs, they come with fears, and all of those things influence the choice of their research, and it influences the way that they design, interpret, and communicate that information. So if you are a person receiving information, you too need to have a recognition that that comes through a filter. My filter is that I am at my beginning career firefighter. When I started out as a firefighter, my job was to put fires out. These days, I am still a firefighter, but I think of myself as a fire freedom fighter. And I feel like my job is to fight for fire, not just put fires out, although that's kind of fun too. I am also a fire lighter. I've been a prescribed burn practitioner on private and public land across the country, and I've been a facilitator of those actions from my students as well. So I'm a fire teacher. I've been teaching at the University of Idaho as a senior instructor since 2011, I think so 13 years, and 2012, I think. And I have been able to see the growth in so many students, and they have taught me so much over the years. And as I've learned about teaching, I've learned, maybe I apologize for my earlier students not doing a fantastic job, but they've all taught me lots of things. I'm the founder and chair of the Idaho Prescribed Fire Council. I'm an EMT for the Moscow Volunteer Fire Department, and I'm a human like you on this earth, having experience with fire, having experience with smoke, and all those things come together to mean that I have a positive opinion about fire. I am sometimes impacted, but I also see the impact that fire and specifically smoke can have on our community. All those things influence the decisions about development and analysis of my study. An outline for today: introduction, framing the problem here. First, or the second manuscript, or manuscript, manuscript one, mistake number one there. So we've got a case study on the redesign of federal prescribed fire training. And then manuscript 2 would be a thematic analysis on prescribed fire and smoke management practices on private land. And then manuscript 3 is a thematic analysis on the motivation and communication of private land managers, and I'll end with a conclusion. I'd like to first start off with a recognition that this land was shaped by fire. Do you enjoy the views that you get when you go hiking? You're welcome, fire. That is the result of a fire-adapted landscape that was established by a fire-adapted people. The peoples that lived on these lands have used fire as a tool to help produce the results in the land that were beneficial to them. And as we approach the idea of reintroducing fire, we'll say, this fire has been here lots of times. And so now we get to listen to the plants and listen to those people and figure out what combination of fire we can have back on these landscapes to promote their health. Without the fire that existed on this landscape for a very long time, we are experiencing an increase in wildfires for a variety of reasons. We are having more wildfires, and that, coupled with an increase in population, is not making a good combo. This necessitates the use of prescribed fire. Prescribed meaning when you go to a doctor because of a condition you have in your body that needs attention, you go to a specialist. That specialist provides you an educated opinion about what needs to happen. They give you a prescription of what to do for improving your health. And if you follow that regime, you'll feel better. The prescribed fire is a medicine for our wildlands. In this case, fire is the medicine, and fire is also the injury. So we have an interesting combo of injury plus medicine. But fire in the right circumstances can be a medicine for our areas. So our imperative here is if we increase this use of prescribed fire, fire also comes with results. Fire of any kind comes with smoke. That increase in prescribed fire could lead to increases in impacts on smoke. So our imperative here is to use prescribed fire while minimizing smoke impact. And how do we do that? It's not an easy task. We need to prepare more capable and willing people. For those of you that remember movie references from long ago, if we want to build them, if we build them, then they will burn, right? We don't just want people burning willy-nilly. We need like people that are burning right there, okay? So the purpose of this study is to advance the safe and effective use of prescribed fire by examining current and professional training in manuscript 1 and exploring the experiences and needs of family forest owners and forest contractors in manuscript 2 and 3. So I'll outline all those here. Manuscript 1 was a review paper on the development of federal prescribed burn boss training. So it's a position called RXV2. And if you are an RXV2, you take what's called National Wildfire Coordinating Group, or NWCG training. I redesigned this training as part of a contract and through my job. And while doing that, I considered what is called the 12 levers of transfer effectiveness. The main categories of these levers are the trainee, the training design, and the organization. And throughout the development of that training, I was able to consider each of those levers and how those could be utilized to increase the effectiveness or the training transfer. Training transfer meaning taking training and turning it into action. Because if there's no action from training, there should be no training. Let's make action from the training that we're doing. The key recommendations for this are to recruit students who are ready. If you aren't to the point where you're going to be utilizing this information, you don't have enough shelves to understand it, then let's wait until you are in this training. Increase applied practice, not just case studies or busy work in the classroom. This is doing things in a training environment that are as close, if not the same, as the actions that you will take when doing the job. This requires a lot more engagement from the people that are leading the class, but gives a lot more opportunity for that space within the classroom when you are not having enough, when you're confused about it, you have the help there to support you doing that. Preparing the instructors. In this world of wildland fire training, we often just assume people, first of all, know how to teach effectively. If you know how to do the job, then you should know how to teach it just automatically by the fact. That's not necessarily true. We also don't necessarily give people the time to prepare to instruct. So by preparing our instructors, by giving them good instruction, giving them the time to do those things will increase the effectiveness of our training. And finally, support the application of concepts after training. This is not something that's a typical pattern within wildland fire. We often just complete training and then see you later, good luck. I'm sure it'll all work out, you'll remember everything that we said. When in reality, humans don't work like that. So how can we support people's training afterward? And just a special shout out to the Great Basin RX300 cadre. We have a great time when we're putting on that class, and they contributed a ton to the development of this material. And being able to capitalize on their expertise was a huge help. So broadly, the recommendations for improving training in a wildland fire sense beyond even the prescribed fire training is that if we would like self-determined and self-directed learners, we have got to let some stuff go. We've got to let go of instructor control. We've got to let go of course structure. We have to increase autonomy within our students, and we have to have a higher expectation of learner maturity. This shift toward pedagogy, which is also a fun word to say, is something that is not right for everything. I'm not saying that people that are entering, let's say, at a freshman level or an entry-level job should be expected to be independent learners. They need to start with this type of information giving. But if we want our learners to progress and be independent and have this application of material intuitively, then we need to change the way that we're instructing them into a more of an independent realm. What are the barriers to this? There's lots of them, otherwise we'd do this more. One of the biggest barriers is that when I shift my instruction toward pedagogy, where people are teaching themselves, guess who's not in charge anymore? Me. Guess who's not getting the hit of dopamine when I share with you all of my fantastic information? Me, the instructors. Also, when I teach in this higher level realm of andragogy and pedagogy, I have less control over the classroom. I don't know exactly what's going to happen because I have to open it up for what you might say. But when I just am a sage on the stage for you, I have lots of control there. This is a shift that's challenging. It can take more time, can take more training for the people that are instructing, but it's an important shift if we want the results of different learning structures. Manuscript 2, purpose and research questions. So the purpose of manuscript 2 is to explore the perceptions, practices, and decision-making factors influencing prescribed burning and smoke management among family forest owners and forest contractors in northern Idaho. So manuscript 2 and 3, we're shifting now toward private land and burning and smoke. So I'll give you a second to read those research questions for manuscript 2. All right. Manuscript 3, purpose is to identify the motivations and communication preferences of family forest owners and forest contractors in northern Idaho regarding prescribed fire and smoke management. And again, take a second to read those research questions. We'll look back around to them at the end. Okay. So the research design for manuscript 2 and 3 was a qualitative case study approach using individual interviews. The location was Bonner County, and this was selected in collaboration with the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, who commissioned this inquiry about smoke management. We chose Bonner County because of its high area of family forest ownership and its propensity for smoke impacts because of the terrain and the lake. And then our participants were these family forest owners and forest contractors. The forest contractors often work for family forest owners. They often will work for people, the other people around. And it is not uncommon that these forest contractors are the ones that are preparing for and completing the burns on these private lands. These groups were of interest because they are outside of the current regulatory system for smoke management. Larger burners that have to comply with a system of regulations where they report what they might be burning, and then DEQ is able to see who could be burning on any given day and manage for that air quality. Groups that are not within that regulatory system, it's an unknown factor. So DEQ cannot plan for the smoke that's being emitted by private landowner burning. And that means that if private landowners are burning a lot and then they allow industry to burn a lot, you might have an impact on your air quality. So they would like to know what private landowners and forest contractors know and do already with smoke management so that they can better communicate with them in the future. Data collection between May and July of 2024. Oleg Zalkowski and we interviewed, who's my research assistant, took a break from fighting fire in the summertime to go and talk to a bunch of random people in northern Idaho. So we've interviewed 37 participants. 15 were from formal groups, recommended from formal groups, such as the Idaho Master Forest Stewards or the Associated Logging Contractors. 9 of them were for personal contacts from ourselves or from colleagues. 13 were from random calls or like visiting the subway, for example, or so we looked up people ownership in a public record, and we looked them up on web pages, and we called them, and some of them didn't hang up on us, and in fact they invited us to their homes, which was an amazing thing. Most of the interviews were in person. They were recorded, and then those recordings were transcribed. In our goings about, we got to see some amazing places in this part of the county, and we even got to take a UTV ride up to its beautiful view. So transcription occurred through Otter AI. We added pseudonyms to the names of the participants, and we did a quality check and correction through that transcription. The overall breakdown of the participants, some of their major characteristics, we ended up with 28 family forest owners and 9 forest contractors. We found that as we continued to interview, we reached a point of saturation within those interviews where we were receiving information that was felt like we'd heard it before. So we found that we had reached that point of information that we needed to have from this population with these numbers of participants. We found that those responses were more similar with the forest contractors than the family's forest owners. We had a wide range of land ownership and land management, wide range of number of piles per year. And in general, family forest owners used mostly hand piles that were smaller. Forest contractors had machine piles that were larger. Data analysis started out with an organization of the data using a process outlined in Bingham 2023. We took each participant and we outlined their attributes, and we considered what are the major characteristics of those participants, and we also created participant summaries for each of those participants. We then sorted the data deductively based on research questions and theories. For example, if there was a question around what they valued, we would categorize that into broad bins of wildlife, fire protection, etc. So we just categorize those into broad existing categories based on existing literature. We then worked to understand that data inductively by breaking outside of those deductive categories and thinking about what the broader information was saying, what the results were showing from our participant responses. Then I went through and interpreted the data by refining those themes. All of this was occurring not just within these bins, but trying to look broadly at the data to see what type of stories existed within each of the categories of responses. And then finally, going through and explaining and situating the results within existing literature. And of course, that's an iterative process, going back and refining those themes, doing an extensive amount of memoing as we go to find, make sure that we're tracking our own thought process as we go through the process there. So manuscript 2, again, the perceptions and practices. This is what we found from with those themes. So the themes for manuscript 2, first of all, was just a summary of current practices. For example, people tended to burn in the fall. They found that there was concern over holdovers from fires that would continue to burn through the spring into the summer. So they would burn in the fall so that they'd make sure that pile went out. Balancing low cost with high risk of prescribed fire. An example here, I just don't want to be the one who starts a forest fire that I have to pay for. There was concern about this. They knew that fire was a good tool. They felt that it was effective at removing their vegetation that they just kept on being produced in this area, but they were worried that it was going to come with some negative consequences. There was satisfaction and dissatisfaction with the current utilization of fire. Many thought that they were just okay just as they were. Some would like to use fire more, specifically understory burning or broadcast burning. But again, going back to that second one, there was fear about that. I just don't have the resources. I just don't have the expertise. I'm just worried about losing this burn and destroying someone's property. This third one, smoke management as an unintended outcome. So to emphasize this here, we don't ignore smoke management, but when it's a good day, it must be done. Like the green piles, if it's on the drier side of things, you'll get more consumption and a cleaner burn. It's just common sense. What's happening here is that in this first part of the statement, they're identifying that they don't really care that much about smoke management. But in the second part of the statement, they are indicating that they actually use good smoke management practices, but not necessarily because of smoke management. it's maybe more because they don't want to lose their burn. So smoke management might be not their forefront of their mind of things that they'd like to do, but it might be an unintended outcome. And then finally, this angst about disparities in practices and beliefs. This is a comment that we got many times. I've had people from California, it's off California, even though, by the way, many of my participants were from California originally. So I've had people from California move up and complain about me burning the burn in the burn season. It's crazy. So there's concern from two angles. One, that people from California or other places would come up and limit their use of fire because they're afraid of it. And two, they would come up and use fire themselves and then do it wrong. And then there would be an impact, and then everyone would be limited in their use of fire. So both angles, there was some concern. The theoretical framework I used to help support some discussion around recommendations was the Adoption-diffusion framework by Rogers in 2003, specifically focusing on the prior conditions and perceived characteristics. And I focused on these two areas because I want to be able to make recommendations to the Idaho DEQ and the Idaho Prescribed Fire Council. And we know that these prior conditions, what people come with and how they perceive a new idea influence their willingness to accept something new. So I wanted to look specifically at these known values and how those might influence their actions. So recommendations and discussions, first of all, is to lower the barriers and raise the benefits. If this does not equal out, if there are more barriers than benefits, then it will never work. We have to make it so that there are more benefits by decreasing barriers and increasing those benefits. Second, strengthening community networks. People like to do things together, even if they say they don't. Aligning outreach with existing practices and motivations. Of course, that requires knowing them and then aligning them. Addressing emotional as well as analytical decision-making. This is not just, this makes sense, do it. This is, I understand that you might be afraid of this. I understand that this might have financial ramifications for you, and addressing that. Empower local opinion leaders. These are the people that are part of the community, that are the ones that are going to influence that. Again, my power trip here would be that I would love to come into a community and think that I am the one that gets to bring this message and make this impact. And everyone will look to me and all the awesome things that I've said. That's just not how it goes. I'm not part of those communities. I need to find the people that are part of those communities and have that be the individuals that make those changes. And then engage with demographic change. Stuff is changing around here. We've got to recognize that if we're going to have a message that's going to be successful, that'll last for about 3 years. We've got to look again, shift the message as things change. Research question answers. So how do they approach, what's their approach to prescribed fire and their concerns? Well, they're very careful. They don't want to lose a burn. And their concerns are that they would cause some impact to themselves or others. They are, though, willing to adopt some new practices. This willingness is if we can give them support, if there's support that exists, if there's clarity of information, then that is going to increase their likelihood of adopting something new. So moving on to manuscript 3, motivations and communication. So the themes for this third manuscript is that they prefer a variety of communication channels. That means that we just can't produce one social media post and call that good. There's a lot of different ways that people communicate, both as a community, but also as an individual. Learning preferences, they learn from learning and from doing and doers. If I was going to, I'd call a forester at IDL because I'm sure they know they'd be the most hands-on and would know the most about restrictions of everyone I know. They are hands-on. They are seen as people that do. This is an important one that came up a lot as well. We've learned from our mistakes. We've learned from the mistakes of other people's mistakes. That's just what we do. That's what I do. Mistakes. Do we let people make mistakes? Can we make mistakes when we're talking about fire? Ooh, tricky, right? Sometimes mistakes can be expensive. How can we encourage learning from mistakes when they occur? And then this ends justify the mean. Vegetation removal was an important value for them. Well, they had lots of values, just a variety of them. They cared about, again, wildlife, fire protection, beauty. They cared about the variety of things they cared about. They found that vegetation removal was a path to that. So if we want to help them meet their values, we need to help find ways for them to remove their vegetation. That might be fire, it might be other things as well. And then this regulatory tension, stuck between a rock and a hard place. You're stuck between IDL, the Idaho Department of Lands, and DEQ. You can't please them both. You can only do one or the other. I think most of the guys I talk to just as soon walk away and leave the slash. Ooh, leaving a slash can be tricky. It's easier, less liability, but we have an outcome. There is a result from leaving that slash, which is increased risk. So this feeling torn between the two can be really challenging. Another quote, you do realize that we're not the problem, right? You do realize that the smoke issue we're getting has nothing to do with us. That's from a family forest owner. If they don't believe that they are the issue, there is very, very limited chance they are going to change any behavior. So being able to recognize that if maybe this isn't the group that needs to be approached about this issue of air quality, or there needs to be some information about how they may be impacting air quality. So this discussion centered around two frameworks, Berlow's communication theory and Knowles's adult learning theory. And so the communication theory, sender, message, channel, receiver, I've aligned that with the 6 principles or 6 assumptions of adult learning. And then on the bottom are my themes that will help address some of those. So from the sender perspective, if we, as a sender, we need to understand the internal motivation of the people we are communicating with. And the internal motivation of this population is that they want to remove stuff. They are motivated to get this vegetation gone. So as a sender, we need to understand that motivation and address it. The message needs to be problem-centered, and it needs to be just in time. They need to know it right now. And that means when they are, if their problem is that they feel stuck, how can we unstick them from this issue that they feel torn between? Our channel, they need to be able to self-direct, they need to find this information. That means we need to present information in a variety of ways. And the receiver needs to be ready to learn and be able to gain experience. And so that learning from doing and doers, we need to facilitate this opportunity to learn by action. Recommendations here are to get to know individual and community needs and interests, use multiple channels, make messaging clear and solution focused, and make sure that our message is at a level that they can understand. This might seem maybe mean to say we got to make this at like a 5th grade level. That does not mean that people are not smarter than 5th graders. It just means that when we're learning new things, we cannot hear them above that 5th grade level. If they have some level of experience, then we can raise that up a little bit. But when we are introducing new concepts, we have to make sure that it is digestible. It's not science talk. This is accessible information. So back to our research questions, the things they value being able to care for their land. They value the freedom to do so. They value the ability to remove that vegetation. They've learned a lot of this by hands-on doing. They've learned a lot of it from people that do. And that's a big part of how they get information. And these recommended strategies are to reach them from a variety of angles and help promote action in their own lives. So knitting this all together, as I zoomed out and I tried to pick up the bigger patterns that were occurring within these 3 manuscripts, what I found stood out was desire and capability. Now, if you recall in the original thematic, we had motivation, capability, and opportunity. And I'm feeling that from what I was picking up from my participants was this concept of desire, what they want to do. And capability is, do they have the knowledge and resources to do it? And as we are approaching the variety of projects that each of us take on in whatever sphere of influence that you have, when you think about making changes, there's a lot to do. There's a lot that you could do here. But imagine a string on each of one of those lines, and that every time you pull that string, you are making progress toward growth. And we can't pull them all, but we can pick ones that we feel like are within our sphere of influence, and we can start to pull those things and start to move people toward action, toward innovation. Final recommendations here are to meet people where they are, and that requires you knowing where they are. Getting to know people, spending that time with them. Up with the benefits, down with the barriers. How can we increase that pull toward doing something new? And forming partnerships and taking action. And these pieces coming together in a variety of disciplines. This is, of course, related to prescribed fire and smoke management, but also anything that if we want people to make change, we need to feel like they've got the tools to do so. Implications for this study, more of what we want and more of the fire that we want, less of the fire that we don't want. There's not good fire, bad fire, they're just fire. Fire just is what it is. But there's types of fire, there's amounts of fire that we want and amounts that we don't want. More public support and liability protection for burners. If we can improve the perceptions of prescribed fire and smoke management practices, we can increase the acceptance of different policies that protect that use as well. And eventually, we're going for a fire-adapted people and fire-adapted ecosystems. We are not going to be getting rid of fire as a thing, just I'm going to like make sure you're clear about that. But we can adapt to be living with fire, and our ecosystems can live with fire as well. The limitations for this study are also opportunities for future research, which is looking at more populations with different aspects within Idaho, outside of Idaho, evaluating what works. What I presented here are theories, are just observations about what might work, what has worked in other research. We need to evaluate what is working, and we need to look specifically at the barriers to adoption of new concepts. So in conclusion, I'd like to just thank all the many people that have contributed to this work and supported me in this work. I'm so grateful for that. The places that have supported me throughout the way as well, my bedroom with wiggly kids, burning piles, my camper in the woods, doing research by the pool, at One World Cafe while on shift, camping, in my garden, in my living room playing Barbies, watching K-pop Demon Hunters, and most recently at the ICP of the Rock Fire, working on this paper. And I just want to demonstrate how long this took me. Wow. Look at how much these humans grew in the time that I've been working on this issue. And it's an amazing process to be able to focus on oneself and grow, and it's been completely worth it, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. And with that, I will open up the floor for questions.
Why don't you unshare your screen, take a drink of water, while people think about what they'd like to ask. And I'd like to open up then to the general audience, and Kristen will keep an eye on the chat for people online that have questions.
Yes.
And you're a teacher, you can call it people.
If I can kick it off. So in the Bonner County study, did you observe any form of community of practice development or dispersion with the perceived newcomers to the environment, where there was either the development or the retraction from an apprenticeship model with the FFOs or private land? Was there a negative or positive kind of move towards a community that was doing the shared learning and problem solving?
So there were communities that were developing collaborative practice, and there were communities that were resisting it actively. So in the communities that were promoting or that were finding this, that a common practice that they would do is there'd be one landowner that had a place that the neighbors would bring material for pile for burning. So let's say there's a person who was from California, but had been here for many years, and he was a contractor, and he had the heavy equipment that was necessary to continue to pile material that was burning. So he would invite his neighbors to bring material to his pile, which apparently is not allowed. But I'm not there to tell them that. So that was developing a community, and then they would have a gathering. They would burn that material together, and they would feel a collective contribution toward their end goal of vegetation removal. Other communities were more divisive and more I will just do what I want my land, you do on your land. But and in the realm of like influence, there are places that one could start. You could start with communities that already have an existing relationship and start to move that direction. I didn't find a pattern within people that had been there for a long time versus not. There's one example of people that were long-term younger, but they were long-term Sandpoint people, and they were friends with a new guy from California from the tech industry. And they were kind of him. They're like, oh my gosh, you took a picture of you burning a pile in August. What the heck are you thinking? Stop it. But they brought him into their community, and he was learning from them. And so it was an interesting combination of a variety of community structures.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have an online question from Kenneth Wallen.
For each chapter / manuscript, what were your criteria and practices to assess / demonstrate a research quality and rigor based on methodologies and methods used?
Good question. A big part of the rigor within the quality of the research was beginning with the designs, to make sure that the questions were tied to theoretical frameworks, and that they were connected to the questions that I had in the study, and that they were going to be supported by the research that existed and that I would be contributing to research, not just reiterating existing knowledge. Within the evaluation of the results and the participants, the responses was the work that my research assistant and I did to independently review the responses, come up with codes and patterns that we thought existed there, and then come together and work through differences within those. And we did that for all of the responses. So we started together, just making sure that we had an understanding of how these things were working out as far as what codes we were making, were they lining up, did we, what overall themes were we finding as we went through. And then we independently went through the rest of them. I think we went through about 5 that way. And then we went through the rest of them independently and then came back together and resolved any differences between what we found and continued to refine those codes. And that was that initial deductive coding process. And then we did that again with the inductive coding process within finding those overall patterns as we worked together to discuss what we were finding. And then of course, taking that information back to Laura, getting her thoughts on how these words that we were hearing were lining up with things that are interesting. As if you've done any type of inquiry, you recognize that the closer you get to this information, the more gobbledygook it sounds to you. So, and you lose what's interesting. You're not quite sure what's interesting anymore. And so it was important to turn then to Laura to say, here's what I found. Is that interesting? I'm not sure anymore. And then within the writing process, looking for the most current research on both methodology, but also on the findings that were both in support of what I was hearing from my participants, but also what might be missing from the current literature about certainly this specific population. It's easy to say, like, what did I find that was new here? Well, no one else has studied Bonner County in Northern Idaho. And the reality is that there is a lot that we do know about how people's behaviors change. And so this particular look is looking at a population to prepare them for some messaging that they can receive. And so a lot of this was about the validation of some of the results that I found, but also finding those places where this unique combination in this population can help us inform future actions that we can do in the community.
Did you ask, oh, I'm sorry. Whatever. Did you ask any of your participants if they'd been through any previous workshops or field days?
So what we asked them was how they have gained what they know. And I mentioned the broader ones, but a lot of people mentioned University of Idaho as a way that they preferred to get information. They felt the University of Idaho was a group that did not have as much bias. Now there were some statements in there as well that you got to be suspicious of everybody. Everyone's got an angle. Like I said, it's true, completely true. So they felt that some groups, specifically, this was a little bit recognized in my results, but also in the literature, is that regulatory agencies are not generally viewed as positively when you're talking about teaching people stuff. So if I'm going to regulate you, I might not be the best person to teach you about things. And that's where extension comes in. Extension is not seen as a regulatory group. They are often seen as being the ones that provide positive information and doing. Yes, that's a good word there. Yes, please.
Congratulations. Two of your slides really got me thinking. One was about the kids and how much they've grown on since you started this process. And secondly, your comment when you said maybe this sort of evaluation needs to be updated every 3 years because things are changing so quickly. And I wonder if you could comment on that from the time that you started, or I know we've been doing this kind of work for long before we started this project, to now. What sorts of shifts in perceptions have you seen? Have you noticed any things that don't get said anymore or are being said that didn't used to be said? Just I'm thinking about COVID with a lot of people moving to this area and so on happening during this time too.
I would say that the flushes in our collective understanding and opinion about prescribed fire come in waves based on whether we have been negatively impacted by something. So in 2021, there was a loss of census prescribed fire that was escaped in New Mexico. Now, did that affect us up here? We weren't getting the smoke from that. Our homes were not burned. Nearly 1,000 homes burned in that escaped prescribed fire. That was a pile burn that got out, and that was a prescribed fire that escaped. little things like that, but things like that will shift a perception quickly. We have a fire that is in northern Idaho. We don't know the cause of that yet. If this cause of a fire that has occurred in northern Idaho was from an escape prescribed fire, that might shift an opinion that we have about these things. So there's the slow shift of people moving in, coming with opinions, and that could be both ways. There was one perspective from a forest contractor who said he's noticed people that are coming in from out of the area are actually more receptive to this information because they know that they have to manage it. So there's a perception that they will be more resistant, and then there's also one that they actually might be more open. So that could go both ways. Change does not necessarily mean a bad thing. We could end up changing things for the positive, but we will see bigger shifts and perhaps more openness if we see these events. In a small instance, we've been preparing for a burn off 4 Mile Road near Viola. And several weeks ago, there was wildfire there, and I went out on that as a rural fire department, just engine person. And not that I'm excited there's this burn, but I'm like, oh, these neighbors are going to be more into this burn that we'd like to plan for the fall because they recognize the reality of this. So these events can make big shifts in people's opinions.
I've got another question online.
Yeah.
It's from Nicole. Hi, Heather. Oh, thanks so much. You have numerous thank yous.
Okay,
Please
thank
read
you.
all of these comments of everyone. She's curious what areas of research have been brought to your attention throughout completing these manuscripts that you work, and what are your gaps in knowledge that are calling to you?
Yeah, so just to emphasize that future directions work, the evaluation of training, the evaluation of programs is so, to me, just a huge gap. In the world of prescribed burning and wildfire, we're so rarely turn around a week later, years later, 5 years later, and see what results that we had there. And in education, have I ever gone back to my university students from 10 years ago and said, tell me what you remember? Never. It's not a part of our process. We don't go back and evaluate our effects. And when we have programs, when we have information that we've given people, do we go back to them and evaluate how, not very often at all. And I mean, from the prescribed fire sense, the thing that I tout all the time is how can we repeat our successes if we don't know whether we succeeded or not? And that's repeating our successes and avoiding our failures. If I know that the conditions of this day that we burned made an amazing result, I'd like to repeat that. If I know that made a result that I didn't want, I'd like to not. And the same with our communication strategies. If we don't evaluate what we are actually doing, how can we make sure that we're making that progress forward? It just is slow. The reason we don't do it, we'd rather move forward. It's more satisfying to move on to something new. We have to look back to see whether we're making an impact. Mary.
Really nicely done. Thank you so much. And this is probably been not understanding enough about fire, but can you describe a little bit what you talk about pile burns and you talk about prescribed fire. I guess I hadn't thought of pile burns as prescribed fire. So maybe can you talk about that difference? And then can you also talk about the difference in what exactly is smoke management and how you see differences between what smoke management means for state managed or federal lands versus private land?
Yep, absolutely. So prescribed burning, there are different camps. Some people would consider pile burning prescribed fire, and some people would. I'm in the camp of pile burning is fire, and it is planned. Therefore, it is prescribed. In the broader sense, we have there's wildland fire. Wildland fire is any fire that's not structured fire. There is wildfire, which is an unplanned ignition, and prescribed fire, which is a planned ignition. So pile burning is a form of prescribed fire because it's planned. The plan for prescribed fire is for the fire to not burn beyond the pile. Broadcast burning or understory burning is meant to move across the landscape. Smoke management, within our air, we have an ability for the air to hold particulate matter. Sometimes it can hold a lot, sometimes it can hold a little bit, depending on the day. You can't tell that by just looking outside. You have to have better science to be able to see what kind of condition the air is in. If I'm producing a lot of smoke in the air on a day that can't hold very much, I will make it turn the purple color on that air quality sensors, which means it's not good for people. Smoke's not good for you, just Like, I hate to break that to you, it's not good for you. And smoke in large amounts for long durations is really not good for you. Prescribed fire makes smoke. Simplification that is not completely true, I'll say it just to make sure that you recognize it. More smoke now, less smoke later. No one can promise that. But the idea is that if you're burning vegetation now, it can't burn again. And so it's already gone. So by producing some smoke for prescribed fire, we have a little bit more control. We have control of which day we burn, so we can burn on a day when the atmosphere is less likely to have a smoke impact. And we can burn less material. We can put that fire out at the end of the day, so it's not going to produce smoke. So smoke management practices include things like picking the right day to burn, not burning when everybody else is burning, and burning material that is dry, so that it doesn't have all of that moisture with it as well. The problem with burning material that is dry is that burning material that is dry also means that it spreads. So you have to balance both. It can be a tightrope walk, if you will. Thank you for your questions.
We have another online question.
Oh, yes.
A whole bunch of groups, so next one.
Zachary Brusek says, how do we tackle the perception versus reality challenge within the fire community as it relates to the fear of liability and fear of getting sued? This comes up all the time as an impediment to getting fire done, but the data shows that the actual number of successful lawsuits is very, very low. So how can we deliver this information any better?
Right. Thank you, Zach. So work that's been done by Sarah McCaffrey and others was also showing that sometimes the limitation that we have is our perception of the perceptional. That especially as fire managers, we're like, oh, people are too afraid of fire to use it. Our perception that they are too afraid of fire is actually a problem, because they may not be as afraid as we think that they are. So how we tackle that is so this idea that there's very, oh, you're very unlikely to get sued. It's really not that comforting to me. Like, oh, we say this a lot for sure. Only 2% of the fires go enormous and burn lots of things. Only 2%. Most of them are great. 2% sometimes burn people's houses down. It's no big deal. I think part of that is not resisting the fear that people have. It's a legitimate fear. I legitimately am afraid of being sued. I care about fire enough that I put myself at risk of, like, I feel like I'm confident enough practitioner. I make sure that I have everything right. There's always a chance. But I think addressing that and being like, I see that you are afraid. Here's why. Are you willing to take this step with me and live with that fear? I'm not going to get rid of it. I don't want to get rid of it. In fact, if I'm not afraid of fire, I got problems. I need to stop doing this job. So we need to have that recognition of that there is this fear of liability and communicate openly about it. This movement from this like fight or flight brain to an analytic brain is really important. And that comes through addressing some of those fear sensors that people have and saying, yes, it is scary. But what pieces can we put into place to reduce that fear? Yeah, John.
This was so fascinating on a number of levels. When you get to an information transfer standpoint, it seems like one of the things I hadn't anticipated until I sat down was that you're transferring information, the channel part of the information was about schematic, as openly hostile to whatever message is there. And it has like interesting implications for forms of communication. I'm very curious, if you showed me that map and said, okay, here's the county we're gonna do. I go, wow, you're gonna mount out over the house. But that's my own perception, such an interesting part of this communication issue. Here's my real question, sorry to talk this. Did you discover that folks in that part of the country were more resistant to another entity engaging in the validation with their land? Or was it something where they were like, oh, I don't want to burn down other people's stuff, which is actually community oriented, don't want to harm my neighbor to go against at least what I would have as a type of
I would put it more in the I don't want to harm my neighbor category. There was certainly some of the stuff. Now, the way that I would have run into people. So again, my methods were I'm getting people that are part of existing organizations. They're going to be open and they're going to be community centered. I'm getting people that are recommended from friends. They're going to be community. Now, the ones that I called. Now they answered the phone call. So, and they invited me over. And so there already is some, so I'm going to be in this population of people that are more open. One of the questions that I did ask was, how do you compare the people that are around you? And so I would have thought that as I asked that question, I did not get a bunch of like, oh, you would never have talked to anybody else in my neighborhood. It felt like they were representative of the people that they were in their area. The people that did invite us over that answered that phone call, that were more like perhaps closed off, they were very suspicious. One of them asked for identification. Two of them called the university to see who I was. And that's great. And that they still had me over, amazing. And we had extremely different views. An interesting thing about this population, even the people that were randomly selected, a lot of them had worked in forestry and fire. A lot of them had background just because they live in Northern Idaho. And so they had some context. And in some instances, so Oleg and I both coming from an operational fire background, you're sitting there, it's a little bit tight, and you're like, oh, like, who are you? How did you get my number? Like, I looked it up, they're like, okay, it's legit. Interesting. And then you start to talk about stuff, and you're like, oh, you have chainsaws. I like chainsaws. You like chainsaws. I like chainsaws. And then like the warm up happens, and so, but ultimately there was certainly like, I want to do what I want to do in my land. I want this freedom. But there were also some pretty interesting comments of, if we want freedom is doing things wrong too. Like we want to make sure that freedom is in all senses, and they don't want to impact things. They want to maintain their freedom, and they know that doing things right will maintain their freedom to do it.
I have a question online. Charles Global says, I imagine you've had some thoughts about. I imagine you have some thoughts about is how can UI and related organizations such as JFSP, fire science stages, contribute to the recommendations you propose and help support advancement for prescribed fire.
So those recommendations, thank you, Charles. Those recommendations that I had in there, they're not just gonna happen. They're not gonna just like magically, we're not gonna be able to, just learn about tons of people in the community or make all this messaging happen or have these community events where we have actions for people to do these practices. This is gonna take work. And the most likely place that's gonna land is extension. And the idea that University of Idaho does not have specific fire extension is just really surprising. That in the amount that we have as a need for Idaho, to have this communication, the hunger that people have to know and do this right. They want to do it right. They want this information. And we don't have a mechanism to really get that to them. We have forestry extension that's been doing fantastic things, but we don't have the setup that we are now seeing at Oregon State University to go out and to reach these communities and to gather that information, to provide that. And then again, that capacity to evaluate the effectiveness of what's being done is a big part of sharing this information. That includes, that's the University of Idaho, but also that includes all these other groups that producing white papers that are written at a level of an 8th grader or 12th grader is not going to reach these community members. That the production of, that's super easy from our end. Super easy to make this beautiful thing, even put little graphics in there. And that's going to reach a certain population that already gets information, is already curious. We need more than that to reach a broader population. Yes, sir.
I'm gonna piggyback off of something that you just said. So you talked about no fire, like extension isn't fire specific. So, and then you brought up Oregon State. So does that mean that none of the other like Mountain West land grant universities don't have that either? And which would also be surprising considering the Mountain West is so fire.
Yeah, not a lot. We do have, Charles mentioned in their JFSP, or there's other organizations that are consortiums of information that are meant to deliver that, but it needs to be a partnership. It's a big effort, so we need more, for sure.
One last question.
First one was Sarah Wilson, she's in the middle. She's a wildfire coordinator, southeast portion of Idaho. The second one is hired, will start in 8. They're pilot coordinators to work exactly on these things.
We're moving there. Yep.
I have a question here for Ojowski. It's curious if the growth of tourism / outdoor recreation demand in Bonner County was seen as a limiting factor for Bernie. Did any of your interviewees mention pushback from other economic sectors, hospitality, etc.?
They did not, but there are in the literature, there is evidence about what happens when a population shifts from from agriculture or from land use and to aesthetics. And that shift has been shown to actually decrease the interest in prescribed fire. Just imagine if you're buying 100 acres because you want to harvest it, you are going to be a type of person that knows how to use machinery. You're going to have maybe more propensity to do things like prescribed fire. But if you just like how it looks, you might not be more eager to jump in there and change that. People coming into the area, this is going to be me reading between the lines here. There's not a lot of, they're like, I don't care whether you like to smoke or not. There was actually, that was not reading between the lines. That was a strict statement of like, welcome to North Idaho. We burn here. If you don't like it, you know how to leave because you came in, leave the way you came. And so this idea that burning, I don't think there's concern, at least from the people that are doing the burning, that they will impact some of that aesthetic value. There could certainly be concerns from the economic side, the people that are then wanting those tourists to come and spend money. Smoke does hinder people's interest. Now, what that's seen as wildfire smoke is seen as that hindrance. Prescribed fire smoke is generally seen as a solution to that wildfire smoke. More tolerance for it.
We do have other examples of that though, where a good one would be the experimental forest. We often have West Window in the first week or two of October, you know, as when our chances would be for a broadcast or tree burns or a pile burn would do sometimes. And inevitably every year that falls within, like the best day of the year falls within 4 days of Moscow Mountain Analyst, which is the biggest recreation event on the mountain also, that trail run, you know.
Just gotta change the time of year for that.
Yeah, and it's because it's nice weather, you know, it's not, it's still.
Yep. Hand out masks on the run. Just kidding.
I mean, we can ask questions all day, and part of it is because you do such an excellent job explaining your answers, but if you come up, and I see a lot of people already have today. But I need to use a general audience now. I'd love for you to think, Heather. They will then do a post-mortem with Heather and we'll keep some.
I do have just a couple snacks here for you. So some awesome.
Grab.
At 5:30, we're gonna meet at the Rotary Park, the Water Tower Park, for some food.
I really did it. My kids dated
There's huge group text right now. Aaron, Sandra, Carrie. Super. Okay. This is from Cassandra and Carrie.
So interesting. I have so many millions of questions, but we get that talk forever.
Yes.
I have so many questions. That was really interesting.
It was great.
I walked by your house and I walked.
Talk to you later.
Stop.